G'day, you're listening to the Big Breakdown podcast with Kris Stafford and Harrison Marshall. Take it away, fellas.
Hello and welcome along to season 2 of the Big Breakdown podcast, where we are delving into the mindset of serial winning coaches. And today we are looking at self-reflection and understanding self. Harrison, how are you?
I'm good. I'm very good, Kris. It's been an interesting few weeks. But no, all is positive. All is good. How are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. I suppose it's today. The podcast release day is actually quite a good one for you. The Wednesday, the 8th of December, because it's the Ace Finals and City of Oxford College. Sorry, you're taking on Hartpury at Starbridge. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, Starbridge. Yeah, no, it's a huge day for us. It's really kind of our first year in the competition. I think the last time, City of Oxford College were in it two years ago, but it was split between a transition year between Henley and Oxford. So, our first full year running the program in the Ace League, and we've managed to get to the final. Big game against Hartpury. It'd be nice to get a nice win. But yeah, amazing effort from staff, players, and everyone at the college to get us in this position, and hopefully we can get a nice W and win the Ace League.
Yeah, it'd be a nice little Christmas present, especially for the lads before the Academy League starts as well. Today, I'm looking forward to today's episode. I think we're going to delve into a really interesting area, and it's something that I know in terms of self-reflection, and it's something that I'm not very good at in my own coaching. So I think I'm probably going to learn a lot from this interview.
Oh yeah, I think it's probably an area in which just speaking to coaches, a lot of coaches I think struggle to kind of reflect on self, and having a stellar guest like we've got coming on, I think he's going to really start to open eyes into how we can do this process, how the process is important, and actually how much it will affect what we put out to the players, because once again, as we've discussed previously on lots of episodes, it is all about who you're working with. Now, if you can present your best version of yourself, then the players are going to enjoy it, get higher engagement, and then get yourselves a nice W's.
Exactly. So today we are joined by Dan Abrahams. Dan is a sports psychologist working alongside individuals, teams, coaches, and organizations globally. He's known for his passion to demystify sports psychology and for creating simple-to-use performance techniques. He's the author of 4 best-selling sports psychology books and is the founder of both the Dan Abrahams Soccer Academy and the Sports Psych Show podcast. A former professional golfer and PGA qualified, Dan has a first-class honours degree in psychology and a master's degree in sports psychology. He's registered with the Healthcare Professionals Council and is an accredited psychologist. And Dan joins us today to talk about reflection and understanding self. Dan, how are you?
I'm really well, Kris. I'm very excited to be talking to both yourself and Harrison this morning. So cool to be on.
No, it's great to have you. One of the key things we've interviewed sort of all these guests over this series around this serial winning framework and how we can learn from the top game and implement things down at the grassroots level. But one thing that sort of me and Harrison reflected on throughout is this importance of understanding yourself and the idea of reflection. And obviously you've got your own podcast with the Sports Psych Show, which sort of delves into different elements of that as well. So we thought it'd just be good to grab you on and sort of chat about that. So I suppose straight off the bat is, why is reflection as a coach important? How does that help within our practice?
Yeah, good question. And I'm sure there's many answers to that. I would personally, from my perspective, look towards 2 answers there. I think self-reflection is important for self-development. I think if you don't reflect, then you're not going to build awareness. You're not going to be able to self-regulate, and thus you're not going to be able to develop yourself. You're not going to acquire knowledge around what you do, how you do it, and why you do it. And I think those are important questions to ask, or important things to ponder if you want to improve as a coach. or at anything that you do in life. So I think self-reflection in that respect, to improve oneself, to develop, to learn, to grow, is whether imperative is the right word, because obviously you can coach without doing it, but if you do want to be the best that you can possibly be, then that's an important process to go through. I suppose the other answer there would be, in order to achieve balance, in order to flourish, thrive through maintaining a sense of well-being, coaching is demanding. And we can get wrapped up in our world of coaching and perhaps not give ourselves the right amount of time for ourselves and to rest, to recuperate, to strike some form of balance, although there will be many times where life is unbalanced as a coach. And I do think that reflective practice is important to be able to monitor. Okay, well, what am I doing? How am I going about this? What does my daily life comprise of? Am I giving myself time, whether it's to rest, to recuperate away from my sport? So I think keeping that sense of health and balance is important, and it is as a consequence of that self-evaluation. So two things: development and let's call it well-being. So yeah, I would say that those would be the two things that come to mind. There would be other people who would mention probably far better and far deeper things, but that's where I would go.
Because I mean that sort of it still mirrors up to a lot of the stuff that we've spoken about before. I mean, in season 1, sort of Harrison and I focused on the understanding of who, what, how, and that related that specifically to understand your participants, understand your sport, and then understand how you're going to do it. But actually, one of the key parts within that reflection of do you understand your skills to be able to get the best out of your participants as well? And then it does mirror up with what Phil Davies came on and spoke about philosophy, and we talked about, he had quite a demanding job in terms of travel. He was, commuting to Namibia to work with the national team from Wales, and now he's commuting up to Leeds to work with Leeds Tykes. But we asked him, how does he manage that in terms of, time for himself, and how he likes to allocate time for family and fishing and other things as well. So it is quite a common theme. What would be, in order to get a sort of a better understanding of yourself, then what skills or ways could a coach start that process of really delving into their own mindset and working out their own, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, I suppose?
Yeah. So I do wonder sometimes if I'm a bit of a lone wolf as a psychologist, distributing the message I'm about to distribute. I get quite a bit of pushback from sports psychologists on this. As a sports psychologist, I'm quite a fan of personality science. I know that you're basing these podcasts on Sergio Laro Bercial's papers, brilliant papers around high performance coaching, and I know that Sergio worked closely with Cliff Mallett, and they utilised personality science in their papers, in their research, and that was music to my ears because I'm a big fan. And I don't know how much of a deep dive we can go into this today, and I'm certainly not probably a deep dive expert here, so I'll try my best to answer that. But I am a big fan of the Big Five. I think, yes, I absolutely understand and I agree that human beings are complex. They absolutely are. But the research over the last 40 years has demonstrated that we as human beings do have typical responses in given situations. Yes, the environment influences. Yes, who you're with influences who we are and how we behave and how we feel. However, as human beings, we do have typical responses, and that's largely based on intrapersonal qualities, how we feel in given situations. And what the science suggests is that, yes, okay, we are complex and we will adapt according to the situation. We do adapt. But there are 5 traits that we tend to engage in tend to explain our behavior. Those 5 traits actually spell out, from an acronym perspective, OCEAN. O for openness, C for conscientiousness, E for extroversion, A for agreeableness, and N for neuroticism, which is basically emotional stability. And I think these 5 traits offer a good structure to personality, a good structure to find out, who am I? How do I respond in given situations? How do I behave? And how does this relate to what we know about how human beings in general behave? Let's, for example, take the personality trait of conscientiousness. Okay. And basically, conscientiousness can be split into 2. Industriousness. So in essence, how ambitious and hard-working we are. And orderliness, as the name suggests, how organized we tend to be. Do we like lines and borders and boundaries? And do we write everything down and keep everything neat? By and large, and I'm sure Sergio would agree here, the best coaches are very high in conscientiousness, especially on the industrious side of things. They're ambitious and they're very hardworking, and they'll be thinking about their profession a lot. They aren't necessarily, but they're possibly quite neat and tidy and like lines and borders and boundaries and like data points and things like that. But let's look at the industrious side of things. When you're high and conscientious and you're ambitious, you're going to work a lot. Okay, you're going to spend a lot of the day thinking about your coaching. You're going to be spending a lot of the day thinking about the people you're coaching. You're going to read a lot. You're going to engage, and therefore that can influence your behaviors and what you involve yourself in every single day. You will have a bias towards this. You have a tendency towards this, and so in your relationships with, say, family members and friends, you might find yourself switching off from them. You might find yourself in your own world thinking about your coaching and your sport rather than paying attention to your other half or your children or something like that. That is probably a problem in your relationships with them. Also, if you're highly industrious, you're highly conscientious when it comes to your profession, you're that way inclined, you'll spend a lot of time, as I've already stated, doing coaching and engaged with coaching, and that's going to eat away at sugars and the glucose in the front part of your brain. It's going to exhaust you, and it's going to be what you're engaged in all the time, and so you don't give yourself much time for rest and recuperation. You don't give yourself much rest. I'm very highly conscientious when it comes to sports psychology, thinking about it all the time, and I can disengage from my environment and think about it, engage in it all day long. I really, really can. That's a problem. I have to recognize that. This is my typical response when it comes to coaching, sports psychology, my profession. I've got to deal with that, because that can be to the detriment of my relationships. That can be to the detriment of my well-being. I'd rather sit down and read a sports psychology book than, I don't know, go to a gig or something like that. I'm quite a sad man, right? I've got to recognize that. That's not always cool. Sometimes it is. Sometimes that's necessary, but sometimes it's not. And these personality traits of conscientiousness, my understanding, and I'm not a personality scientist, but my understanding is it's driven by the dopaminergic regions of the brain. I can't go into any great depth there. I'm still learning myself, but it's absolutely fascinating stuff. I mean, I'll say to your listeners, look up, read Dan McAdams. He's been on my podcast, The Sports Psych Show. Dan McAdams is somebody that Cliff and Sergio, they used his framework for their research. He's arguably the world's leading researcher in personality development, so basically studying personality over the lifespan. Research Colin de Jong so Dan McAdams is at Northwestern. Colin de Jong is so Northwestern is in Chicago. Colin de Jong is at Minnesota Personality Labs. Great work from him relating these personality traits to the neuroscience, and that's where I've got it. It's related to dopaminergic pathways. And I think this is the important thing to say, is when people say, oh, but Dan, people are complex, they're different all the time. Well, yes, but we have these typical tendencies and they're hormonally driven. They're driven by affect, by feeling, by emotion. They're driven by the hormones that we release. And so we feel like we should engage in work. We feel like we should be engaging in this behavior or in that behavior. And that's where our typical responses come from. So I think a study of personality science and personality development is a really useful thing for coaches to undertake. So that's the conscientiousness side of things. So conscientiousness is industrious and orderliness. Sometimes you can be too orderly. Okay, sometimes, and then that's how you see the world, and you demand orderliness from others. So as a coach, and I've been in this situation where coaches said to me, but Dan, I've got players in front of me and I'm saying things and they're not writing stuff down. They need to write stuff down. They need to, it's crazy because they're not going to remember, and they need to remember this, and they've got to have a notebook and they've got to write everything down. Well, not everybody sees the world like that. That's orderliness. That's orderliness as a facet of, or an aspect of, conscientiousness. Well, I'm very, very sorry, but not everybody sees the world in the way that coach does. Not everybody actually flourishes by writing things down and keeping a notebook. There are probably many examples of champions in various sports who don't write a thing down and probably remember stuff or work more from an intuitive perspective. So don't for 1 minute think that your lens of the world is how other people see the world. And that's all documented in personality science. So if somebody wants to come and push back on that, it's all in there. Yes, we are very different as human beings. Yes, we are complex. Yes, we will engage in our different environments in different ways, but we still have typical tendencies. And there is almost like a gravitational pull to those typical tendencies. Let's take another one related really to what I've just said, openness to experience. Openness is another trait. And this is an interesting one in sport, I think, because we can go straight to the experiential stuff on marginal gains. You know, we have grown up over the last 20 years in a world where I suppose 2 decades ago we had Sir Clive Woodward talking about 1%ers. 1%. We don't want to do one thing 100% better. We want to do 100 things 1% better. Okay. And then you had Martin Johnson, his captain, coming out and saying, yeah, but 96 of those 100 things were a load of BS, who was much more of a pragmatist. Lower in openness, possibly. That's an assumption, but lower in openness, less curious about the world, more focused on 1 or 2 things and getting those right, more of a traditionalist in his viewpoint, possibly. Woodward, much more open, much more curious. Okay, what can we bring in? Wow, much more having much more of a capacity to look at the world around him and explore different things and bring that in and not be overwhelmed by that. Again, that's hormonally driven. Marginal gains would be the same thing. And I do wonder, again, I wasn't in this environment and I want to be very careful from what I say here ethically, but Sir Bradley Wiggins, from some of the things that he said, from the way he goes about what he does, seems much more open, much more, I know what I like what I do, it's been successful, I'm going to get on with it this way. From my understanding, I might be very wrong there. I want to put that caveat in. But there would have been cyclists in that environment who were more open, who would have more of a tendency to say, no, I just want my few things that I want to get right. Whereas there's others who go, yeah, give me this, give me that, right, okay, my kit makeup, this data point, that data point, brilliant, marginal gains, there's many marginal gains, fine. But not everybody can accommodate that. And that is a personality trait that has been documented over the last 40 years. that has good, solid empirical evidence underpinning it. So if we think the personality doesn't influence the choices we make as athletes and as coaches, and the choices we make as coaches in the way that we communicate with athletes, then wrong, in my opinion. I think that's sorely wrong. Agreeableness. I work mostly in the world of football. And I understand why coaches do this, but the amount of coaches who bemoan, especially at the very highest level, players who they perceive to be uncoachable, players who are difficult players. And there are undoubtedly players who are more challenging, let's say, to form a relationship with and to coach. Often they're low in openness, in my opinion, as a hypothesis, and often they're low agreeable. So they don't necessarily say, yeah, just tell me what to do, just teach me. They're low agreeable in terms of they know what they like, again, similar to openness, but they're going to disagree with you. Agreeableness has more of a social dimension than openness. Openness is more intrapersonal. Agreeableness is more interpersonal. So from a low agreeable player, they'll say, no, you are talking rubbish. I don't agree with you there. You want me to run this way? You want me to engage in that coaching? No, absolute codswallop, absolute rubbish. I'm a striker. I'm not going to defend from the front. I'm here to score goals, gaffer. What are you talking about? I'm going to do it this way. So, and that is often underpinned, in my experience, by low agreeableness, because you see a pattern from these players. They tend to be low agreeable across a range of things. You sit with them in the lunch hall and you say A and they say B. You say black and they say white. They're quite low agreeable. They're quite disagreeable. So low agreeableness can play a part here. I'm just giving you a few examples here. So actually understand, I suppose I'm talking more about understanding your athletes here, but it comes back to yourself in terms of, well, who am I? Am I a low agreeable person? If a low agreeable, in fact, Twitter is a fascinating world because you see the divide here. Some people are really agreeable and some people are very low agreeable. And it's actually really interesting. And this is where knowing yourself, I'm a low agreeable person. That's fine. That's not wrong in and of itself. All these personality traits exist from an evolutionary perspective because they all have fitness for human beings. They all help us get along and get ahead of others. That's why personality exists. Personality is about having a filter to see the world in order for us to survive and procreate. And in order for us to survive and procreate, we've got to get along and get ahead of others. Low agreeableness helps us get along and get ahead. High agreeableness helps us get along and get ahead. Conscientiousness, high conscientiousness helps us, if I can say conscientiousness, helps us get along, get ahead. Low conscientiousness can help us get along and get ahead. Although in a Western society, that usually orients towards a high conscientiousness there. So all of these things have a fitness value. So it's not saying it's right or wrong. It's just understanding, who am I? How does who I am help me? How does who I am hinder me? These behaviors I'm engaging in, how are these helping me? How are these hindering me? These urges that I have the urge to be organized and I have the urge to make everybody around me organized. How does that help and how does that hinder me in my relationships? I have the urge to work 24/7 and I want everybody around me to work 24/7. How does that help me as a coach and how does that hinder me? I have the urge to seek no stone left unturned, openness, when it comes to my coaching, and I have the urge to make everybody else around me seek no stone left unturned. How does that help? How does that hinder me? I can get a little bit emotionally unstable when things are going wrong. How does that help? How does that hinder? I am always emotionally stable. How does that help? How does that hinder me? I am an extrovert. I am Jurgen Klopp. I'm in your face all the time. I'm like, yeah, I'm an extrovert, and I don't know if Jurgen Klopp is an extrovert. I'm somewhat guessing there. It might just be an act. But how does extroversion help and hinder? because being an extrovert, okay, you can, being an extrovert is assertiveness and enthusiasm. It's not, oh, I love parties. That's pop psychology. The extroversion introversion dimension is to do with assertiveness, and it's to do with enthusiasm. It just so happens that most cues are social cues. So extroversion and introversion get related to sociality, and it absolutely has got something to do with that. But when you are extroverted, you can tend to be assertive. When you are assertive as a coach, well, guess what? That's going to influence how you coach. It's going to influence your beliefs as a coach. It's going to influence, it could make you more autocratic, more liable to try to persuade rather than to listen, to persuade rather than negotiate. Are you heavily do you orient towards being heavily assertive? Well, how is that helping you? How is that hindering you? Do you get overly enthusiastic? Here's one for you. Somebody put on Twitter a video. Sorry, I'm rambling on here. I hope that's okay. But you got me off on one. Somebody put on Twitter a clip of an Australian swimming coach. To all intents and purposes, an outstanding one. I mean, Australia did brilliant in the Olympics. And I think his athletes won some gold medals. And they put a clip of him celebrating. And to suggest that it was exuberant celebration would be an understatement. He went bananas. I don't know if you guys saw this. And a lot of people were very critical of this, saying that this was him taking the limelight away from it. Was, why is he making it about him? And there may be some real justification in terms of pointing fingers at him in that respect. Maybe he was overzealous. Maybe it's too much. Maybe he does need to tone it down. Well, that's between himself and the Australian Institute of Sport, maybe, and his mentors and maybe his athletes. It's nothing to do with me. I'm just reporting back what was said. Equally, he may be a great coach because of his extroversion in terms of enthusiasm. Extroversion is enthusiasm. He was demonstrating extroversion in that moment through the prism of enthusiasm. Maybe he can't help being like that, and it's just the way that he is. And in that moment when his athlete won gold, he couldn't help himself. Maybe that athlete loves that about him, and that's a big part of their relationship is his enthusiasm. So let's be very, very careful. And that's why I regale when somebody says, oh, well, personality science, it doesn't matter, it's all a load of BS. Well, hang on. This gives us good explanation of the structure of personality. Now, are there more personality traits than 5 main ones? There probably is. There's arguments to say that there's a 6th one. There's probably a 7th or an 8th. But what personality scientists would suggest, any worth their salt, would suggest that most traits load onto these 5 traits. So they become a part of these 5 traits. And then, I mean, we can get more complex here about how things change over the lifespan, but I won't go there. But have I given you a sort of an idea of, I really believe that taking time to think who you are as a person and potentially using the 5-factor model as a guide, not as a truth as such, but just as a guide in terms of this is how human beings typically function. And then understanding what this means to you, how this can help, how this can hinder. That's how I would see it.
And I think I totally agree. It's a big part of coaching is relationships, and relationships are built on our personality traits and our perceived personality traits from the individuals as well. So if we can understand what kind of makes us tick, it means that we can kind of gain those strong connections with our athletes at the same time. One thing I will say, just listening to that, is that so many examples you've given there just made me think of so many coaches I've either worked with or played under, and some of them bring back really positive memories, and some of them bring back some kind of negative memories. What would your advice be for a coach that's kind of he's done this reflective process. He's thought about his personality traits, and there's one area in which he absolutely hates about himself now because it's it's got negative connotations to it. I know I'm totally agree with you that there's no bad unless it's causing harm, but there are positive and negative connotations to all 5 of those personality traits. What would your advice be for that coach that says, "Oh, I hate this about myself"?
Yeah, let me be clear that when I say there's no bad, they all exist because they can all help. When you talk about negativity, I mean, negative emotion is neuroticism, emotional stability, emotional instability, and emotional instability exists because we do have to have threat responses. We do have to recognize threats in our world. We do have to experience anxiety to inform our behavior. We do have to experience anger, maybe or hostility, as a consequence of anxiety, because that is important some of the time. That helps us take action and move towards our goals. That's what personality is all about, filtering in order to move us towards our goals. What I would say to you is, you start off the process of helping yourself by becoming aware of who you are, your typical responses. What are my typical responses? And I think that it's useful for a coach to go to key people, key stakeholders around them who might give them some insight into who they are. Just have casual conversations. It doesn't have to be anything formal. You don't have to have some kind of laid down interview. You can actually have a conversation with somebody as well. What do you notice? What do you notice about me? What's your experience of being coached by me? Or what's your experience of co-coaching with me or being engaged in my program? How does and how do you feel that what you're saying helps me, and how do you feel that hinders me? I've worked with, I'll give you an example. I've worked with a coach one who would be deemed to be very low agreeable. He was always pushing back. No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. Think of it, and that actually helped me to be, in many respects, a much better psychologist, because his drive to be low agreeable meant that I had to go away and I had to come back and give different answers, and almost seek no stone left unturned to be a better psychologist for this coach. Yet at the same time, this coach could be very intimidating because of his low agreeableness. He could be very combative, and with the wrong person in front of him, then that could actually atrophy that person's ability around this coach. They would get a little bit scared, a little bit fearful, and so that's where low agreeableness didn't help this coach. If he took it too far, and the person with him actually just got worse at their job, couldn't answer him, got scared, got fearful. And so this is something I said to this coach, and he kind of agreed with me. He kind of saw it. Okay, yeah, I get that sometimes I can push people away, and sometimes these people that I push away are actually highly competent. It's just they get a bit scared around me, and so they become scared to make a mistake, and so they're not very creative. If any of that story makes sense to you. So I think it starts with self-awareness. It starts with, who am I? It's getting some 360-degree feedback. It's being open to, it's exploring with yourself and with others how who you are helps you, how who you are hinders you. And then it's starting to explore, possibly with another person, a mentor, a coach, a psych, how to start going about shifting what hinders you, being able to adapt from what hinders you. And as I say, that's probably ideally, if you're in the position, using a coach or a mentor or a psych somebody to help you. And there's all kinds of tools and techniques that you can use to be able to do that. You can start to decide what behaviors that you need to engage in, as opposed to the behaviors you tend to engage in, the behaviors that hinder you. So if you're low agreeable, you could start to choose being more agreeable. So rather than, for example, jumping down somebody's throat when they've said something that you disagree with, you could choose to be more agreeable by saying to me, okay, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. Talk to me a little bit more about how you see the solution here, rather than just simply saying, no, you're wrong. No, you're wrong, and jumping down. That's what low agreeable people can tend to engage in. It might be, using some kind of CBT to be able to argue against yourself, or some kind of ACT therapy that kind of accepts if you're very high conscientious and you tend to work 24/7, and those impulses drive up through your body into your mind and through your brain, you start to say to yourself, or into your brain and through your mind, you start to say to yourself, right, I've got to get on with that bit of work. And then you can recognize that and say, okay, no, hang on. This is my tendency here. I can overwork. Actually, I should be spending a bit more time with my family this afternoon. Okay, let's go and do that. It's recognizing that, and then it's committing to actually spending time with your family. Look, guys, there's so many things that you could do. I think it starts with awareness, and it starts with choosing a method that you can utilize in order to shift your behavior, irrespective of what you're feeling within. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. And I think, it's an area in which it fascinates me in terms of, I think one of the modules that we that both myself and Kris have done on the sports coaching masters, I did mine with Sergio around understanding expertise and understanding self, and we touched on the personality traits. In terms of that conscientiousness and that real drive, are they kind of, do you have to learn to pick up those cues to know that you're overworking? Because it's a common theme throughout all coaches that I speak to, that they've got, like you say, they've got that drive to want to get to be the best, and they want all they want to do is focus on the sport that they're working in. Are there natural cues, or are there cues to say, right, is it a learned behavior that we can recognize that, well, I'm overworking here, I've got to take some time to spend time with the family, or go out fishing, or spend some alone time?
I think it's both. I think that if you're talking about, if I'm understanding you correctly, if you're talking about natural cues, I think it's, things like exhaustion, suboptimal coaching performances, increased unhelpful relationships or maladaptive relationships with players through things like argument, hostility, etc. I think that those happen, and when you recognize those, and I accept that sometimes you won't recognize those because your filter system means that you're so into what you're doing. But I do wonder if with experience you start to recognize those, or through work with a mentor, a coach, you can start to keenly have conversations that help you recognize those. So I think there are definitely natural things that emerge through your body and in your brain, through your mind. There are natural things that arise. You don't necessarily spot them. And also there's cues and clues and triggers from your environment, with your family, in terms of, I dare say, for most people, not all, there will be people in their lives who will be open and honest with them and say, well, our relationship is predicated on your coaching, or it is, this is happening in our relationship here, and this isn't acceptable to me. So those are the cues and the clues and the triggers that you can identify. I do wonder if it's young coaches, especially young ambitious coaches, aren't necessarily going to be readily equipped to identify the internal and identify the external, and that it does take some experience. It does take some mentoring or some coaching to be able to notice these kind of, as I say, cues, clues, and triggers from within or from outside, without, that starts to help you become more aware and acknowledge that you need to adjust. And I think with maturity as well, and with learning about the human system, human functioning, you perhaps start to understand your limits, your capabilities, and that gives you some evidence in order to notice how much you have to adjust and whether you have to adjust. So I think there are natural cues. Whether you spot them will be dependent on experience, education, learning, mentoring, coaching, and things that are out of your control, such as people willing to actually challenge you on your behavior. So anybody listening in, and as weeks and years go by, as coaching becomes, as opportunities to learn as a coach become more accessible, whether it's with the internet, courses, masters, PhDs, mentorships, coaching, etc., even social media, I think people are becoming more attuned to the subtleties, the nuances of effective coaching through the prism of human functioning, rather than, well, you just got to work 24/7. People are starting to understand now that that's not necessarily the optimal way to do this, that life is more nuanced. And what they'll find as well, coaches will find as well, is these are the kind of conversations they're having now with athletes anyway, around, well, athletes need rest and recuperation. Athletes need to pay attention to their data points. They need to find their optimal way based on their individual needs, rather than this bland message of, well, you've got to work really hard and you've got to put in maximum effort, energy, and attitude, and these kind of pop pseudoscience sort of messages. It's much more individual specific. So I think that it's not necessarily that there's something natural within. There might be, something might arise, and a coach might have a moment of inspiration and say, hang on a minute, I'm behaving this way and this isn't helping me. That often happens, but it's often somebody from outside that provides a challenging message where they go, oh, okay, I see. Yeah, okay. They have a bit of insight. Or they go, like you guys did, go on a master's degree course or have some kind of coaching and mentoring. And that coach or mentor or that course makes you go, hang on a minute. You have that aha, that bit of insight. So I think that's the thing that tends to drive change.
So that sort of mirrors up to, we've referenced the quote before that Sergio says when he was doing the research, was that one of the coaches' wives turned to him and said, you interview my winter husband or my summer husband, sort of dictating that in between seasons there is a change between sort of that coach's behaviour and how they are. If we've got a better understanding of ourselves and sort of how we can try and get the best performance, we referenced this. We had Alison and Annan talking about coaching environment, and she sort of spoke about how, when you're coaching, you need to have that smile on your face. So if you're working at optimum level, you're going to be enjoying what you're doing. That's your opportunity to perform. What impact would that then have on the environment that we're creating for our participants? If I'm naturally at my best and operating at a high function of understanding myself, what benefit can that have on the environment that I'm trying to create?
Well, if I was to take your question literally, then I would suggest that if you're performing at your best, it's going to have a positive impact on your environment. How would you like me to expand on that?
Well, I suppose like in terms of the participants, because if it's more their engagement, and obviously, I mean, the common answer would be that if they're enjoying it, then they're going to be engaged more. But what impact would that have in their behaviors? Because one thing we're trying to do with this whole series is talk about, well, what can we learn from the top level to transition down into community sports clubs where coaches are amateur. They're doing it voluntarily.
Yeah.
But one thing we've emphasized throughout is this important of understanding your participants. So yes, if I'm operating at my best, that's going to create a good environment. But how does that help our participants as well, especially if we're working within youth sport or talent development?
So for me, I tend to, I suppose my 25 years in high performance sport as a competitor, as a coach, and over the last 16 years as a sports psychologist, I've really boiled coaching down to 3 Ps. And so this is my own sort of idea, driven by experience and what I'd like to think the empirical research. I think it's quite hard to argue that there's not 3 Ps in coaching. When we coach, it's really narrowed down to 3 Ps: participation, progression, and performance. Participation, progression, and performance. So by participation, I'm talking about the engagement piece. We've got to help players engage in our activities, in every activity in our sessions, in every session, every week, every month, every season, and hopefully for a lifetime, maybe. And by engagement, I mean to help our people, our players, pay attention, to help them be interested and involved, to help them enjoy themselves. So attention, interest, involvement, enjoyment. And I think every coach on this planet, whether you're an under-6 coach or whether you're the coach of the world's greatest team, is engaged in participation, in engagement. Jurgen Klopp, participation is his most important thing. I think if I put that to him, he would go, thumbs up, yeah. An under-6, an under-7, and under-8 coach, absolutely the same. It would be a different form of engagement, but it's still engagement. And then we've got the second P, progression. Most coaches, if not all, are probably invested in learning and growing, helping their people, their players to learn, and helping their people, their players to grow. Certainly the learning, whether a coach under 6, 7s, and 8s is helping children to learn, might be, some will say, no, free play, but then that's their prerogative, and others will say, well, yeah, I want to help introduce some fundamentals, if I can use that word, in the game, and that's a debate that goes on out there. But the vast majority of coaches are invested in helping people to learn and maybe to grow as people as well. You know, people coach because they tend to like people or be invested in people, and so helping somebody grow as a person is a big part of it. So that progression piece, so participation is engagement, progression is to learn and to grow, and then performance. Performance for me is the competing side of things. And again, we can go back to, well, maybe we don't want a 10-year-old to worry too much about performance. And again, there's big debates there, but certainly at certain levels, competing is a skill. So we want to help our people, our players, to be able to compete, to be able to perform. So we have participation, progression, and performance. And so let's come back to your question here, Kris. If we want to optimize, I mean, in many respects, coaching is performative. Just as performing is performative, just as an athlete, we have to perform. We engage in something that's performative. Coaching is. And some days we don't feel like it. Some days we don't feel like it because we're human beings, just as sometimes athletes, how many times are footballers saying, Dan, I was warming up, I just didn't feel like it. I wasn't there. I felt flat, I felt lethargic. And they get themselves into all kinds of problems because coaches at certain levels have a massive go at them without actually digging in to the deeper side of that. But there you go. We're trying to put the worlds right there as sports psychologists. But coaches have off days because you're human beings. And this is where, we have to remember our brain and our nervous system, anxiety happens to you. Nobody does anxiety on purpose. Anxiety happens to you. Doubt happens to you. Worry happens to you. A drop in confidence happens to you. Mood happens to you. Low mood happens to you. And so on and so forth. Your personality characteristics happen to you. So if coaching is performative, we have to strive, let's say, to be as close to 100%, whatever that means, as is humanly possible. And when we are performative, when we strive to be as close to 100%, again, whatever that means, as possible, then I think we are better at helping players participate, engage, pay attention, be interested, be involved, enjoy. We are better at helping players learn and grow. We are better at helping players compete. And that does, your privilege and your burden as a coach is it does come back to you, doesn't it? It does. Yes, there is a degree of locus and control on the players in terms of the attitude and the effort and the energy and all that jazz that they have to bring to the table. Of course. But you do influence as a coach. Of course you do. And so when you wake up and you've got a coaching day, or when you finish work and you're going to your wet Wednesday night coaching, you've chosen to coach. You've chosen to coach. And so there is an onus on you to, some days you're going to feel great and you just go and do it. And bang, you're in your, what I would perhaps call your coach face. Other days it's an effort to get there. And so what I would say to coaches listening in, just as I say to players when I work on a technique I call a game face, which is basically, to throw some jargon at you, is some psychological jargon at you, is based on Albert Bandura's self-efficacy theory and Yuri Han's individual zone of optimal functioning. Mouthful. Let's just call it a game face, right? Let's call it a coach face. You need a coach face. Now, you could build a coach face in a very simple way, through your memory, through your imagination, through your perception. Memory. Think about you at your best. Think about your best coaching. What are your best coaching moments? What did that look like? What did that feel like? What did others see when you were at your best? Imagination. What's your dream coaching session look like? Feel like? What will others see when you're coaching 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10, 12 out of 10, whatever that means? Perception. Who do you want to be as a coach? How do you want to go about your business as a coach? What do you want others to see, to experience? Memory, imagination, perception. And from there, I would try to elicit some keywords, some action-based words, You have to be able to act them out. You have to be able to be, do, and act them, to enact them, to embody them from head to toe and from toe to head. I want to be alert and alive. I want to be fun and upbeat. I want to be energy and focused. Pick some action-based words, things that you can be, do, act, enact, embody. A couple of words, then go out and be performative around those. Act them out. Imagine there's a camera on you and show that camera those words. Engage with your players in the style of those words. Now you can also build on that. And this is where the work of Yuri Hanin is really interesting with his individual zone of optimal function. Individual zone of optimal functioning is about, it basically says from his work in the 1970s with Olympians, he figured out that there's an optimal level of anxiety and an optimal stress, and there's an optimal level of optimal emotions, helpful and unhelpful emotions that one experiences. And he actually in his book talks a lot about metaphors as being very useful in order to chunk the kind of behaviors you want to experience or you want to enact. And so the use of metaphors is really interesting. So let's just say, so I, as a person, am quite introverted, and somebody like, and to almost cliche now with him, somebody like Jurgen Klopp, I look at Jurgen Klopp and I think, okay, can I be like him? Smile on my face, enthusiastic. Not saying he's definitely like this because I've never been on a training ground with him, but let's just assume that he is. And then I said to myself, like, my key words are energy and upbeat, energy and upbeat. And I love getting a picture of Klopp, smile, enthusiastic, gestures, positive gestures, assertive, a leader in that respect. So I think of energy, upbeat, Klopp, energy, upbeat, Klopp, energy, upbeat, Klopp. It's a wonderful pictorial metaphor. You've chunked it linguistically, energy, upbeat, Klopp. But how many pictures? You get a catalogue of pictures that denote a catalogue of behaviors that represent who you want to be in every activity, who you want to be from a communicative perspective, from an operational perspective, from a cognitive perspective, from an emotional perspective, from a behavioral perspective, from a motor behavioral perspective. And that's what Yuri Hanin is saying. And that's where this foundation of a game face, have a coach face. It works with players all the time. It's just such a low-hanging fruit thing. So easy, simple. Not easy, simple to change behavior in that respect. Create yourself a coach face and then go and execute in your coach face. Doesn't guarantee you're going to coach 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10. You might make mistakes. You might get the activity wrong. You might feed back in the wrong manner. You might engage with a certain player in the wrong manner. I'm not saying that won't happen, but I am saying you might portray yourself and represent yourself in a manner that optimizes participation, progression, and performance. That's what I would say.
That's definitely something I'm probably going to sort of think about going out, because you do, especially when you're out coaching every day as your job. It's hard because you're constantly thinking about the next week, the next game, the next, what you're going to try and achieve. But also then, if you're a volunteer coach and you've been at work all day and it's raining and you've got to get up and go out, and your behaviour does, the players can sense if you're being down a little bit negative, that behaviour does transition onto the players, and that can then impact on how our session grows and develops as well. So I think actually
sorry, Hugh, I just want to interject. I beg your pardon. I think from an emotional contagion perspective, it's enormous, and so you're absolutely right. And one other quick thing to say, sorry, Kris, one other quick thing to say is that, because I don't necessarily think, just backtracking, I didn't necessarily answer the question on, how do you change those personality characteristics, or how do you do it, adjust and flex them, because there's so many blooming routes you can take there. You can look at motivational interviewing, you can look at REBT, you can look at CBT, ACT, you can look at mental skills. There's so many things that you can do, but this is something that you can do if you know yourself and you know what hinders you. Whether you describe it as personality characteristics or whether you just describe it as behavior, these behaviors I engage in don't help me. You can pick a coach face that counters those behaviors. So it might be, for instance, that you can tend to be low agreeable and you can get a bit impatient with your players. And from feedback, whether that's just from observing yourself or from feedback from others, that actually that impatience damages engagement, learning, growth, and players' capacity to compete. Then one of your coach faces might be patience. So you work on that that's a blueprint, upbeat and patient as an example. Okay, I'm going to stay patient. and you remind yourself, and you can have somebody who's observing you and all kinds of things. So I just wanted to say that is a useful way to adapt your your typical characteristics.
And I think, like you said, because the key action-based words, your brain triggers, and then that will then remind you what you need to do to try and get to that level, which, you know, then can have a positive impact. I think, obviously, we focused on a lot of this understanding self and how we get the best of ourselves and then our participants. On the basis of reflection, we sort of talk a lot about reflection of sessions and reviewing. How important is it to just also reflect on our programs as they're happening? Because when we associate reflection, we always talk about maybe doing it at the end. When actually sometimes, you know, if you're looking at a 12-month program or a 9-month program, rugby season, for example, you know, by the end, something that you want to action might be too late. So how can we go about, you know, reflecting throughout the entire program in terms of referencing to what we want to get and where we need to be to?
Well, let me throw a few things your way, and then, you know, we might explore how you guys have done this historically. So I think that ongoing reflection is important, and I think that, as you said, we can look at the small picture, we can reflect on the small picture, but I would imagine we probably always want to reflect on the small picture with reference to the big picture. If we define small picture as today, this week, the activities, the sessions we're engaging in, the conversations we're having, and we think about the big picture being the season, for example, and the plans that we've laid out. When we're engaging in some kind of reflection, you might not do this every day. You might have a daily review, sure, but you might have a weekly and a monthly review, and it might be in your weekly and your monthly review reflection that you're actually honing in on the bigger picture as well. And so when you're reflecting like that in your weekly and your monthly review, that's what you're doing. You're thinking, okay, well, what we're engaging in here now, the outcomes we're having, the performances that we're demonstrating, let's bring it back to the 3 Ps: the engagement, the learning, the growth, the competitiveness, if that's relevant. In our coaching environment right now, what does that look like? And how is that compared to what we want for the season? And therefore, are we on track or are we off track? Do we need to adjust something? That's very much a model that I would personally use with somebody, is to suggest that with their daily review, you don't necessarily have to consider the bigger picture, the whole season, but in your weekly and your monthly, you may do. And for me, that would revolve around the engagement, the learning, the growth, and the performance piece. And so therefore, from that review, the small picture with reference to the bigger picture, you might consider shifting something, adapt on the go. How have you guys tried to go about doing something like that?
I think there's one thing to point out, that these reviews can sometimes, they can be both informal and formal.
Okay.
So I think when I first had a head coach role within a club, you know, just having those catch up post session in the bar at a community club, and speaking with your assistant coaches there and then, that's, you know, that is a form of reflection if you're discussing about around, you know, but like, I think the challenge for a lot of coaches in that environment is how can we make those conversations a little bit more meaningful. So it's not just blasé, right? Yes, we can still stand there at the bar, a nice pint of lager in your hand, but like, how can I challenge coaches now? Can we make those conversations more meaningful? Can you write down a couple of notes to say, right, these are our action points for the next month? I think especially on the grassroots level, we can get caught up in having formal meetings, and yes, I think there is a time and a place and importance to them, but like so much can be shared and be spread through the informal stuff, like post session in a rugby club. For me, it's been a mixture of both. So we'll sit down. So we tend to break the season up into theme categories, a block, and then theme it. So currently in the environment I'm working at, we had pre-season be our base training. Then we went into camp just before the season started, and now we call it the campaign before we go into the playoffs, which is our final push. And we will sit down and we review each month and after each session, but we will review at the end of each kind of training block or match block and say, right, I like what we've done. I like what we've done here. Right, what's really important that we get? What are the key messages? The key traits that we want from ourselves going forward into the next block. I think I think theming it as well has allowed the players to come onto this. We've referred to it before as the energy bus. The players are with us. They like the theme. They're buying into the process that we're on, and I think it just brings a bit more of a collective together.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying, because you're reviewing and reflecting and reviewing based on something that's fairly concrete, which is your themes. As you're speaking now, I'm thinking of the what, how, why. What are we trying to do, or what were we trying to do? How are we trying to do it, or how were we trying to do it? And why did we do it that way? And then is there a better way? Was there a better way to do it? Is there a better way to do it? Was there a better way to do it? I think just having a structure, listening to you, and I think you're 100% right. Having a structure to the conversation. There is always time for informal conversations, the corridor conversations, the informal chats. But when I reflect back, I've been in far too many environments where it's, 1 week we're having this type of conversation, and then the next week it's another type of conversation, and then in the following week there's another type of conversation. And again, we could go back to personality characteristics and say, well, the head coach likes it that way, and it's a little bit messy, and that's okay by him or her because they like a bit of chaos, and that's fine. But I do wonder if something like that daily, weekly, monthly review is worth. Yes, there's time for informal conversations, but there's also time for formal conversations that require some kind of structured process, where we actually have 3, 4, 5 questions that we're asking us with relation that we're asking ourselves, with relation to something. That might be with relation to the themes. It might be with relation to engagement, learning, performing. It could be anything. If a Premier League club calls me tomorrow and we start talking about this, with a Premier League club, for instance, then competing is going to be a big part of it, performing. But engagement is as well, and learning is as well. This is why I'm biased, and I come back to these 3 Ps. And I think my big part of it, that the coaches would have their own idea of how they want to review, but I would be saying, well, are our players engaging? Are we being successful here? This is me as a sports psychologist. Are our players learning? And so let's go back. Are our players engaging? What evidence is there that they are? What are we being successful on here? And what can we do even better to get them to engage? Are they learning? And again, going through that those questions. Are they learning? What evidence is there that they are? How could we do this even better? And then the performance side. And in the Premier League, that's important. Right? Are they competing? What evidence is there that they are? And then it's putting the processes in place as a group of coaches. Obviously, at that level, you're going to have a group of coaches. You're putting the processes in place that help you then have that cycle of, okay, can we engage them even better? Can we, what processes, what practices can we engage in? Are we going to do rather than just an SAQ thing at the beginning of each session, we're going to play a fun game. From a learning perspective, we're going to add some variability, some desirable difficulties in. Are we going to use the work of Bjork and Bjork with desirable difficulties, or we're going to have challenge point stuff or whatever? From a competing perspective, we're going to teach the players some more mental skills. Or so. Do you see what I'm saying? So that review drives. As a sports psychologist, I'm very much leaning to it. And my job is very much around those three pieces: engagement, learning, competing. But I love what you're saying there about the themes. I just think it's for the coach to say, well, what are we going to review, and what is the structure of our review when it comes to the formal, and make a decision about what that looks like, and repeat that, because ultimately we have to accept surely that some form of successful coaching is to a degree high conscientiousness. It just has to be. You cannot be low conscientious. You cannot not give a crap about anything and not be industrious and not be orderly at all. There has to be some orderliness there. There has to be some industriousness. So I think that structure is important there when it comes to review. And there'll be people who say, well, you've got to ask these questions and it's got to be this way. It's, for me, if anything, it's actually quite emergent. It's more, okay, in your context, how you're going to be evidence informed. What is your context? What are your experiences as a coach working with reviews? And then what does the empirical evidence say as well? Okay, from here we can create an appropriate review for your context, for your culture, if that makes sense. Rather, it's got to be that way.
I think there's some real good points there, and I think that whole reflection piece is important, and I think we've gone through some really good tips there that coaches, I think, can go through to not only get a better understanding of themselves, but also the programs that they're offering as well. Dan, it's been fascinating speaking to you. I've learned loads in this sort of discussion, and there's definitely some bits that I'm going to take away and sit down, sort of even with an hour program, and go, right, how can we use some of this to make sure that we are getting the best out of not only ourselves but also the people that are with us. So thank you very much for coming on. I think it's been a brilliant chat. Thank you.
I've really enjoyed it.
So Harrison, self-reflection, understanding self. What a chat with Dan. I mean, I've probably made more notes here than I did in any of my master's lectures. What were your thoughts?
I agree. Once again, it's kind of that kind of thing. That kind of stuff just interests me, and it was like I could sit there and I could listen to Dan talk about psychology, sports psychology, self-reflection, coach reflection, player reflection for hours on end there. And similar to you, I've got plenty of notes on it as well. I think
when we went down a complete different rabbit hole for what I was generally expecting as well. Like, I never really thought at the start that we'd start sort of going through the 5 personality traits. But actually, when you're thinking about yourself and self-reflection, that's probably really important to understand your personality. And I know it's probably a big black hole of research in there within that. But I thought that was quite a key point that he made of sort of, who am I? How does this help me? But then how does this hinder me? And I think they're 3 really important questions when we're considering self-reflection to sort of start as a starting point.
Oh yeah, and I totally agree. And the one thing I did like about it is that he he said each one of these personality traits has got use, whether it's one way or the other in terms of individual ones. So for example, openness. If we're really open or we're not very open, there's still both of us. Both kind of traits that help us as human beings progress in terms of where we want to get to. So, in terms of, in some environments it might hinder you. Some environments might allow you to flourish. It's just like what I gained from what he was trying to get across there was that self-reflection and understanding of personality traits and understanding the environment that you're working in. Both of them together dictates whether those kind of traits are useful or not, and whether we should begin to adjust and actually start actively thinking and actively work on adjusting those traits to something a little bit more positive to suit our environment that we're in. But yeah, it was certainly interesting, and I probably will go away and research more on those 5 personality traits and how they affect me as an individual as well.
Yeah, and I think that's something that may be worth sort of, if you're within a coaching program, whether this is in community sport, whether you're working in some environment to ourselves, is actually doing these sort of personality tests, get to know each other, because you all do think you know each other, and you all have your own probably frustrations with each other at times, but actually you need to know sort of why that person does do stuff certain ways. And I think if you, especially if you're a volunteer-based coach where you're working with a number of different parents, for example, who you kind of all been thrown together because you've put your head above the parapet and willing to give coaching a go, it's probably really an important tool to really understand the people that you're working with, because like we touched on with Dan, around the environment, that how you are and how you present yourself, how you perform, as we sort of discussed with Alison, does have an impact on how your players will then react to that session. And I think you getting to know each other to get the best out of each other and relate that, this is definitely something I'm going to do, around the coach face, was just, I think that's something that once you get to know each other, you then try and create your own coach face from that, based on the key action-based words that you want to do. That's going to have a massive impact and positive outcome on the environments that we create and how we then get the best out of the people.
Oh, 100%. And like for his example, he talks about energy, upbeat Klopp, because that's that's what he thinks of when he thinks of Klopp, and thinks of if he's having a down day, he'd want lots of energy, he wants to be upbeat, and who does that remind him of Klopp? I think and he touched on a really really good point within that, is that those 3 words, upbeat, energy, Klopp, like I said, it paints 1,000 pictures in your head in terms of what is that giving you? When you say energy, upbeat, Klopp to yourself, right? I know straight away. I can do it now. I'm not even going out to coach, but because I've said energy, upbeat, Klopp 3 times, 4 times now, all I've got is Jurgen Klopp in my head now, and I'm thinking, I can see him coaching. I can see him on the touchline. I can see those videos. So when it comes to for maybe ourselves in rugby union, can we think of maybe upbeat, patience, Eddie Jones? Well, I'm not saying that's a good example or not, but I think with that, we're relating that back to us.
Yeah, but I think with that, it doesn't need to be specific to your sport either. Like you could look at someone like Klopp, like as an example of actually what he presents on a sideline is how you might want to behave yourself. And I think when we're looking at things like behavior, that's probably quite an important. I mean, you're not going to try and model yourself. Although, to be honest, I reckon a lot of coaches sometimes do model yourself on a coach that you're seeing. You want to make it. Well, we spoke about a lot of what works for who in what circumstance and why. So you want to be that magpie of take the shiny things from little things and then use that to then shape you. And I think that's where that coach face could really play a part in that. And like you say, you say it 3-4 times, and Dan emphasised this in the chat, was you start to picture that in your mind, and that's probably what you'll then go out and deliver. And I think that was definitely something that I think I'm going to take away. In terms of you give some great points around the reflection of a program and how we reference that. What did you take away from the bit that then sort of Dan shared on that?
So I think I know. Talking of magpies, it's my turn to be a magpie, and I've seen something nice and shiny, and I'm going to steal it. And I probably will steal. I will steal his 3 Ps in terms of participation, progress, and performance. I think that's breaking down and structuring it around something so simple. It goes back to what we were talking about in terms of back ages ago in season 1, because we want to simplify the complexity of our sports, right? How can we simplify the reflective process between ourselves as coaches and ourselves as individual coaches? And I think participation, right? Are the players engaging? Are they enjoying? Are they turning up? What's good about it? How can we get better at it? Is great. Progress. Are they learning? are they learning in an enjoyable way? What's good about it? What can we do better? And then lastly, performance. Well, performance is, it's easy to evaluate performance because it's what you see in front of you. And that doesn't have to be performance results, like you and I have said endless times. That could be just strong participation numbers. That could be a good performance indicator for you because, for your club, whether it be football, hockey, tennis, rugby, at grassroots level, it's about getting participation and getting numbers through the door. That is success. So I think, like I said, I will be the magpie in this scenario, and I have seen something shiny, and I'm stealing Dan's 3 Ps.
The same. And I think you can really get some measurable, like you've just said, measurable outcomes from that. And just if you, if you structure your blocks like you have, from your pre-season to your camp to your competition and then your playoffs, was it?
Yeah, the final
around
push,
that. It was something like that. It was linked to that. I didn't make notes on that. But you can align key measurable outcomes linked to them 3 Ps for when you do your quarterly or monthly reviews. And I think that is important. Because everything that we're doing within that on reflection, you want to make sure it's measurable. I think too many times we write down not meaningless objectives, but objectives that we can't actually fully determine that we've got there or not.
Yeah, and I think going back to that, just making it measurable just allows you to say, right, it's clear cut. We're hitting these targets. We're not hitting these targets. So right, how can we? Are we going to step up the targets, or what are we going to do to make sure we hit those targets? And in terms of setting those kind of goals and when we reflect and setting those kind of outcomes we want to get to, I know it's this next bit is probably going to come across as very educational, but can we make those goals smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and put a time to it? Those 5 key points, whenever we're looking at reflecting and planning ahead, are massively key. And I think, making sure you've got that in mind for each one of your goals, whether it be short, medium, or long term, that allows you to begin that reflective process. And like you made a great point within there, right? To reflect isn't just at the end. We can start that process just by planning well before, reflecting at stages throughout, and then at the end doing a big reflection in terms of this is what we've done well, this is what we need to do better for next season, and then planning, and then it rolls over. Right, we're planning, reflecting throughout, and then big reflection at the end. I think that's really important that you're able to do that.
But definitely, it's the only way that you're going to, like I said, but if you just reflect at the end, it could be too late. You've missed an opportunity, in my book.
Exactly.
Yeah, another brilliant chat. Thoroughly enjoyed that with Dan. Episode 8, we're coming to the end soon of our serial winning season. We've got a fantastic guest coming up next in episode 9 in 2 weeks' time. So head to our social media to sort of find some more information on that as we get close to time. Charlie's got all of our details at the end, and we will see you next time.
Cheers for listening. Don't forget to join in the discussion at Big Breakdown HQ on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.